Thank you, Keith. Good afternoon to everyone. On behalf of Concerned Lake Catholics, I would like to welcome all of you to this timely webinar presentation. My name is Maureen Harper, and on behalf of the CLC Planning Group, I thank you for your attendance today. Concerned Lake Catholics is an independent group which came together informally at first in 2018 in response to the scandal of clergy sexual abuse in our church. Since that time, we have come to understand more deeply the critical role that the laity can and must play in promoting healing and reconciliation for all individuals and groups who have been wounded by our church. We endeavor through our various programs and activities to help lay Catholics find their own voice and bring it forward in order to live out the laity's role of co-responsibility in our church. Today's topic, Human Trafficking, a Challenge for Indigenous Communities, presented by Dr. Rose-Alma McDonald, is timely, as during the month of May in Canada, we observe Red Dress Day and remember all the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. CLC is committed to bringing the best in Catholic thought to our diverse community so that our actions may be inspired by thoughtful reflection on Scripture, church teaching, and sensus fidei. Please explore our website, concernedlaycatholics.ca, and sign up on our contact page if you would like to receive our monthly newsletter, which highlights news and events and upcoming presentations. I will now offer the CLC's opening prayer. Creator God, source of all being, we place ourselves in your holy presence. We ask you to open our hearts and minds to each other and to what you have to say to each of us through this presentation today. Help us to embrace and further the synodal process by speaking and truly listening with honesty and humility and great love. May it bring hope and healing to our wounded church. We continue to pray for the victims and the survivors of sexual abuse. May all who have been abused in any way by your church's ministers be respected and receive real justice and authentic reparation. May we be beacons of Christ's healing light and compassion to them, to their families, and to all the world. We also pray for Holy Father Pope Leo and his courageous leadership of our church in very difficult times. May his faith in the Spirit, working in the people of God, and through the Synod on synodality, bring new life to the church and good news to the world. Amen. I now ask my colleague, Brenda Coleman, to offer CLC's land acknowledgement and statement of solidarity with victims of sexual abuse.
We acknowledge that many of the lands we live, work, and meet on are the traditional territories of Indigenous peoples across this country. As settlers, it is our responsibility to learn about and acknowledge our colonial history and the ways in which we may continue to perpetuate it. As people of faith working for justice, we are called to discern how we are to respond to the calls to action of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and how we can support Indigenous peoples across this land we know as Canada. We stand in solidarity with all victims of clergy sexual abuse. We are moved by compassion to reflect deeply on the sufferings of our wounded brothers and sisters and to pray for them always. We make a commitment to educate ourselves and others about the devastating impact of this scandal in our church. We promise to promote justice and healing for victims and their families, and for all those injured by this betrayal of our deepest values. We commit ourselves to the transformation of church structures and clerical culture that put protecting the institution above justice for victims and accountability for offenders. We rely on God in all of this, asking that we may be sustained in this commitment we have made. I now invite Kathy Pete to introduce our special guest.
Thank you, Brenda. It's my pleasure to introduce my friend and fellow planning group member and our Indigenous Relations lead at CLC and incredible expert in her own right, Dr. Rose-Alma McDonald. Dr. McDonald has over 35 years national and regional experience as an Indigenous consultant, administrator, and advocate. In addition, she has over a decade of work experience within the Indigenous Catholic community locally, regionally, and nationally. Dr. McDonald has worked diligently at the parish level as a parish administrator, manager, and liaison with the Dioceses of Ogdensburg, Valleyfield, and Ottawa-Cornwall, where she's the Indigenous Advisor and Indigenous Relations Committee and Diocesan Reconciliation Committee member. She's a commissioned lay minister with the Diocese of Ogdensburg, as well as a commissioned Eucharistic minister and Sacristan. Dr. McDonald is respected and well known through her work with the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops on important issues such as human trafficking in Indigenous populations, and as a contributing author to the National USCCCB Native American Pastoral Plan. Dr. McDonald comes from a strong Catholic background founded on Native ministry and faith formation. She is a certified catechist and catechetical leader, experienced director of religious education, as well as a member of the Indigenous Catholic Research Fellowship Governing Board of Directors. Dr. McDonald was recently featured in a Cardis publication on Indigenous Voices of Faith. Cardis is a nonpartisan think tank dedicated to clarifying and strengthening, through research and dialogue, the ways in which society's institutions can work together for the common good. Through her work, Dr. McDonald has represented over 633 First Nations on national policy issues related to health, social development, disability, and injury prevention, in addition to over 500 tribal and disadvantaged populations and jurisdictions in the USA. Welcome, Rose-Alma.
Well, thank you for that very beautiful introduction, Kathy. As you mentioned, you and I are good friends. We became good friends at the Synod in Waterloo, and it just seems like a long time ago, but it wasn't that long ago. And so, just to add to your introduction, I guess everybody that's online with us is kind of all over the country. I'm based in Akwesasronon, which is a First Nation that's located near Cornwall, Ontario. And I'm going to ask Keith to put up a map for us so I could show you where I am. So, Kathy mentioned that this particular project it was created or initiated by the USCCB, and they reached out to us because of our uniqueness. If you look at this map, the red part is Ontario, and all that blue, there were islands that are between the mainland where you see Cornwall, and then the other side where you see the US. And so there's a couple international bridges that link us to New York and to Ontario. But within our own jurisdiction, we have again Ontario, the Cornwall Island, the red. The green is Snai, Quebec. It's one of our districts. And then there's a little teeny weeny piece of land sticking out not far from the red island, and that's where I am. That's in Quebec, St. Regis, Quebec. And then the yellow that you see, that's part of the reservation that's in New York State. So you'll see, Quebec, New York border, you see Ontario, you see the international border of the US and Canada. And we're the only reservation in North America that's that unique. And then there's a little red line up on the top, and that's the 401. So one of the issues for us for human trafficking and human smuggling is that route that goes like to Montreal, Quebec City, goes the other way, I think maybe all the way to BC. And it's a great big long highway 401. And there's also another highway in New York that's close to us that goes to New York City, which is only about 5 hours from here, and big cities along the way. So that's how come somebody like me is involved in this, because we're a very complicated community. So Keith, now you can go back to the beginning of my PowerPoint so we can kind of get everybody going with what we're doing and why we're doing it. So you'll see the young woman holding her child. Part of the work that we were doing was with another, we were a pilot project with the USCCB, but they did two more pilot projects, one in Hawaii. I wish I could have been able to go to that one. And then the Navajo Nation. And the Navajo Nation is 16 million acres, 110 communities. It borders Gallup, New Mexico, Flagstaff, Arizona, Page, Arizona, and Farmington, New Mexico. It's a very big community, big reservation. I think the second largest in the United States. And they have, when I first went there in the 90s, the Navajo Nation was about 300,000. Now it's a population of, I think, over 600,000 or 700,000. So they've had a big population boom across the Navajo Nation. So Keith, you can go to the next slide, please. The United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. Thank you. So there's also a CCCB, the Catholic Conference of Catholic Bishops, and we're kind of affiliated with both because of being on the international border. So we're represented in the CCCB through Bishop Alain Faubert from Valleyfield, and formerly Bishop Noel Simard. So the next slide kind of tells you a little bit about who the USCCB is. So they're based in Washington, D.C., and that's their headquarters, and they represent about 440 Catholic bishops serving 200 dioceses across the United States. And they are an assembly of bishops that jointly exercise pastoral functions on behalf of the Christian faithful of the United States. So like it was mentioned that one of my other duties with the USCCB was I was part of a writing team where we did a Native American pastoral plan for the USCCB. There was one done, I think it was in the 70s, and so we updated it. And so that's kind of one of the things that the USCCB has done is to acknowledge diversity through different racial groups. The pastoral plans include I think the Black American and Hispanic, and there's a couple others too. Anyway, so the role of the USCCB is to encourage and promote on-Catholic activities in the U.S. and in our case, U.S. Canada, and then organize and conduct religious, charitable, and social welfare work at home and abroad, and then aid in education and care for immigrants, and also to promote education, publication, and the common good that the church offers humankind. So another reason why this is so high profile right now is we had we called it a listening session last year, almost to the day, here in the community. So the USCCB was here, the bishop was here from Ogdensburg, and then we got together about 29 people and talked about the issue of human trafficking in our unique community, because the USCCB was looking for some kind of model or plan that, because we have so many jurisdictions, that would be relevant for other Indigenous communities across the country. So and we had a diversity of people that attended the listening session, which included clergy, priests, and nuns, and the bishop, and then the tribal leadership, U.S. chiefs, and the Canadian chiefs of Mohawk Council of Akwesasronon, and then the Attorney General, and then the Border Patrol and the state police. We had everybody, and some of them were in uniform, so I think they were kind of intimidating to each other, but it was a good thing to have us all in the same room. So one of the things out of all of us that were together that day, we maybe didn't agree on, some people, unfortunately, are anti-Catholic, because of the residential school. But one of the things that we found as common ground was human trafficking, which is a horrific crime against the basic dignity and rights of the human person, and that all efforts must be expended to end it. And then human trafficking is violence. The violence suffered by every woman and girl. It is an open wound in the body of Christ and in the body of all humanity. It is a deep wound that also affects each one of us. So, again, you saw the map and the corridor. It's easy, for traffickers to trick our young women and steal them away. And, sometimes we never see them again. Fortunately, some of them have been recovered, and but human trafficking affects the community, the family, the grandparents. There's so many levels of effects of human trafficking. So we mentioned that I'm a Eucharistic minister, but I'm also a lay minister. I took 2 years of training with the Diocese of Ogdensburg, and the most favorite part of my training was the social teachings of the Catholic Church. I was kind of saying to them, because we had learned the theology and all the history and all the other things about the Catholic Church, but I was always sitting there like, how does that apply to me and my community and my people and our children? And here it is, social teachings of the Catholic Church. So in terms of human trafficking, one of the social teachings is the dignity of the person. So that means, combating human trafficking in order to protect the dignity of persons and ensuring that no one is treated as a commodity or stripped of their inherent worth. And then the dignity of work, addressing human trafficking in terms of safeguarding the dignity of work and making sure that persons are free from exploitation and can work under conditions that respect their rights. The poor, the ethical principle of solidarity and advocating for empowerment and upliftment of persons that are in poverty and marginalization, and then pro-life, combating human trafficking in terms of protecting individuals from exploitation and ensuring their freedom and well-being throughout their lives. So one of the things about our area is, you know, on the New York side of the community here, there's a lot of migrant workers, and then with budget cuts in Washington, like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of programs were shut down that were providing assistance to migrant workers. And it's a big deal here in this area because, the migrant workers, if they didn't have subsidies from, social programs, they would be below the poverty level, and, there's language issues and a whole bunch of other issues that they run into. So because of the budget cuts in Washington, D.C., the whole program was cut. And so now a lot of those people are in jeopardy, and having to get programs from other sources. So in terms of the Catechism of the Catholic Church, any act that leads to the enslavement of humans is a sin against persons' dignity and fundamental human rights. And then also, according to the Catechism, acts of enterprise that for any reason lead to the enslavement of human beings to being bought, sold, or exchanged like merchandise in disregard for their personal dignity is forbidden. So, Kathy mentioned that it's been like about 10 years that I've been working in the area of the Catholic Church. And, I guess we all had that, that misconception about what is the USCCB and what is the CCCB. Like, people didn't realize that the Catholic Church was doing things like, advocating on behalf of migrant workers and immigrants and murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls and human trafficking. So this was kind of an eye-opener for our group last year when we had, those 29 variety of representatives. Okay, so what is human trafficking? Oh my goodness. So it's a modern day of slavery, and it's a $236 billion industry. And so to estimate, there's about 49.6 million people living in situations of trafficking. 27.6 million are in forced labor, 22 million are in forced marriages, and 12 million are in modern slavery, especially children, women, and girls, which account for like half of them. And half of the forced labor and a quarter of all forced marriages are found in upper, middle, and income or high income countries. See, that's another thing. Human trafficking can happen to anybody. It's not just poverty or, poor communities. It can happen anywhere. So there are anti-human trafficking programs. Last year, also around the same time as our listening session, there was a human trafficking conference in Ontario, in Cornwall here, and they had victims that spoke about what had happened to them and how they had survived. And one of the things that came out was that a human trafficking program isn't necessarily a one size fits all. You have diversity in terms of language and culture, and then location. And so, like, there's a lot of elements of human trafficking that, are an issue for programming. and should be culturally based. So, as I mentioned earlier, most Native Americans are not English speakers. Words and phrases are not easily translated from Indigenous language to English. And then the best way to have a window on a culture is in a Native community is through language, like the Innu and in Nunavut. A lot of them don't speak English. And then in French Quebec, we have Montagnais communities, even our Mohawk communities. There are people that speak either, a Montagnais language or Mohawk or Cree and French, but not English. So there's that challenge of, communicating with victims. So as I mentioned, one size doesn't fit all. Um, and there's not one Native American culture. There are differences depending on the lands, the tribes, and historical narrative. So you have to adapt outreach to vastly different Native communities um, in order to challenge human traffickers. In our particular community, there's again Ontario, New York, Quebec, but there's four more other Native Mohawk communities. There's two near Montreal, Oka and then Akwesasronon and Ganawage, and then there's Tyendinaga and Six Nations, and then Wata. So there's like six Mohawk communities. Our language is Mohawk, but the dialects are different. And then we all live in different areas, like Ganawage and Akwesasronon is like right next to Montreal. And then we're here next near Cornwall, and then U.S. Canada. Tyendinaga Six Nations, they're closer to Toronto. Anyways, so when you have communities that are so diverse like that, a program that would work here in Akwesasne might not work in Six Nations or Ganawage or Akwesasronon because the demographics are different. The languages are similar, but the dialects are different. And then you also have, other, mainstream languages as well. So, it's very difficult for us to put programs together to challenge human traffickers. So some of the reasons why human trafficking is pervasive within Indigenous communities. So poverty, like on the Navajo Nation, and then here too, in a lot of our communities, maybe Northern Ontario, there's pressure on families and individuals to meet their basic needs because they don't. Maybe there's not ways of making a living in some of the communities, and like the Navajos, they're like 90 miles apart from each other. There's not always infrastructure there. Most communities are still without, water and infrastructure. And so that, electricity, that's another thing. Some of them still live in hogans. And so it's, how do you provide services and information to such a diverse collection of peoples across basically North America. So another thing is, which is a nightmare for us, overlapping police jurisdictions. So jurisdictional authorities are determined, whether a victim is a member of a federally recognized tribe, whether the alleged offense took place on Indian land or not, and then whether the accused is a member of a federally recognized tribe. So, like, say for example, if someone is human trafficked or if someone is a victim here in the community, it depends on which part of the community. Were they in the U.S. part or were they in the Canadian part? And then which one of our police has jurisdiction? And then, things like murder are not within the jurisdiction of our police. So then the federal police come in, or the state police come in, or the RCMP. And then, maybe the victim is Indigenous, but maybe the trafficker is not Indigenous. And then there's all those like just multiple jurisdictions, which are a nightmare for us. And then isolation of First Nation communities. So tribes are large in land area, but have small populations. And then isolation is a factor in terms of sharing information, sharing of resources, programs and resources, and the fear of outsiders. So again, the Navajo Nation is 16 million acres and 110 communities and 600,000 Navajos. So how, but they're still isolated because they're in that 16 million acres, they're along the Grand Canyon, and so they still live in Hogan. So, how it's not like everybody has the internet and, the technology that some of us are used to. So that's an issue. And then, there's a community like us. We're 6 miles square and we have 14,000 Mohawks here in Akwesasne, way smaller than the Navajo Nation. But, we're in a small community that we have services, but the services are challenged because of the jurisdictions. So in terms of misinformation by human traffickers, some criminals in human trafficking make the mistake of thinking that they cannot be arrested by tribal police or prosecuted by tribal courts. Yes, they can. We have our own tribal police. We have our own laws. So when speeders come flying through the community, they do get stopped, they do get arrested, and they do get charged. And so they think that when they run to the reservation, that they're above the law, and they're not. So that's another thing is human traffickers. They infiltrate Indigenous communities because they think that they're not subject to tribal laws. So the other thing is that makes our people more vulnerable is the closeness to the borders and trade routes. So many tribes are on multiple borders, which results in smuggling, hiding drugs, weapons, and people. So there was a very famous case last year of 8 immigrants that were trying to cross the border illegally, and they died. And that was here in this community. And so there's smuggling and trafficking going both ways, from the community and into the community. So that's, again, another big issue for us. And then lack of information. Crime statistics are lacking, especially for murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls. I did work for the province of Saskatchewan on that issue. And the way that Indigenous people are treated in Western Canada is there's a lot of prejudice and a lot of hate crime against Indigenous people. And so a lot of the murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls go unreported. Nobody cares. I think the most famous cases are in British Columbia and Saskatchewan. There's a murder highway in British Columbia that's, where a lot of Indigenous women have been lost and never found. So information gathering and sharing involves many different agencies, federal, state, tribal, as well as different technologies and jurisdictions and human resources. Also, cultural barriers. The language and culture is not a one size fits all. Our culture as Mohawks is very different than the Cree, in Northern Ontario and Manitoba, the Algonquins in Quebec. And so What works for one community might not necessarily work for another community in terms of the culture, but also in terms of language. So in terms of resources, poverty can also affect, law informants, uh, databases, training on human trafficking and cultural sensitivity. Here, because we're so jurisdictionally challenged, there is somewhat better, cultural sensitivity and training, but it's inadequate in terms of sexual violence and lack of understanding of tribal cultural norms and tribal and state laws. Again, because we have so many jurisdictions here. So it's hard to press charges. Sometimes charges are pressed against the victims. Like one of the biggest problems is the treatment of victims of human trafficking. A lot of times they're treated like criminals. And this seriously prevents victims from coming forward, and victim bias by law enforcement, which plays a significant role in the re-victimization of victims within criminal charges. So again, Saskatchewan, a lot of times um, an Indigenous woman will be the victim of, a human trafficking crime or a rape but the way that they're handled by the justice system is, oh, they're just a Native person. She was probably drunk. She's probably on drugs. She was probably on the street. And so they get treated like criminals instead of, the victims that they are. Okay, so what's the difference between human trafficking and human smuggling? So in terms of human, okay, so the other thing I'll mention is that I did say that, like, on the Navajo Nation, they do have casinos, not on reserve, but just in the border towns. So they have like several, and we have one here. And so in terms of human trafficking, traffickers will come and hang out in the bar or at the hotel or at the casino and sweet talk the girls, and then trick them. And so that's kind of the issue. And in bigger areas where you have bigger cities, that's a bigger problem for Indigenous communities. So they use force or they coerce and then they recruit and harbor and use individuals for sex services or labor services. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they're transported, but oftentimes they are across countries and states. So for example, someone might get coerced here from our community. They can get, Montreal's not far away, Ottawa's not far away, the 401's not far away. So it's easy for them to put them on a plane. The next thing they know, they're in Vancouver, or New York City. It's very difficult because these traffickers are really tricky. And so then the other issue for us is human smuggling, not just us, but it's different from trafficking because somebody that wants to, go into the States, or usually it's from Canada to the States, they're looking for somebody, that can, move them across the international border, either through water or, by land. And there's a fee. They might pay $10,000 or whatever it is, to get into the country illegally. And the difference between human smuggling and human trafficking is that smuggling, once they get across the border, that's it, they're gone. With trafficking, individuals are bound by their traffickers. So some of the risk factors, and we have them, a lot of them in Indigenous communities anyways. But there are even bigger risk factors when it comes to human trafficking and smuggling. So like a lot of the communities, I guess we're lucky because we're a little bit more advanced than some communities. Because across Canada, I think we're the second largest First Nation in Canada. So there's like 14,000 of us, but there's like small little communities that are maybe 500 people, So there's a lot of diversity in the US and Canada in terms of the size of Indigenous communities, which results in structural challenges like there's gangs across the country, and then high crime rates, and then community violence, um, and then there's tension between the communities and the policing authorities. We've always had a bad relationship with the New York State Police. Um, they they don't. It's all about whether they respect our sovereignty and like our jurisdiction within our communities. We also have under-resourced schools, high dropout rates, limited opportunities, and lack of safe entertainment or community resource center. So my little community here, St. Regis, that sticks out on the St. Lawrence, the schools have been having problems with the kids because they don't have, sports or things to do. So they break into houses and they, you know, steal vehicles and they race around with all-terrain vehicles with no helmets and oh my goodness. So there's a lot of challenges, in terms of the communities themselves. And then, we have weak protection systems and, sometimes poor community leadership or power structures. Um, just because, our leadership changes every 4 years. So sometimes there's not good continuity. And then there's limited access to resources and safe places. So that's challenges for, Indigenous communities, I would say North America wide, US, Canada. And then unstable home life. There's some of our youth that get bounced around in foster homes and, different types of situations. And so they, sometimes accidentally end up on the street because they don't have safe housing. And then weak relationships with family and origin of caregivers. We did a survey a few years ago on injury prevention, and we surveyed the community. And, like it's hard nowadays to parent children because they, if they feel like the parent's too strict, they call the police and say, my mom hit me, or so there's that difficulty in terms of the relationships within families, and then also because of foster care and child welfare. So in terms of vulnerabilities of victims, we have big problems with gender, the LGBT, there's been issues with gender and homosexuality. Some people are starting to come out now, and there's some people that discriminate because of that. Also, there's discrimination because of age. And then racial, there's still racial tensions between off reserve and on reserve. And then, as I mentioned, migrants and minorities and displaced persons are discriminated. There's a lot of people in the area that don't speak English, they only speak Spanish. And that's kind of rare for this neck of the woods. So there's discrimination because of that. And then low self-esteem, histories of abuse and neglect, and mental health issues and substance abuse, and displaced persons because of legal statuses and language barriers. There's so many issues because of our diversity, but Indigenous communities have similar issues across the country. Ours is just a little more unique. And then insufficient law enforcement. Like I was mentioning, the Navajo Nation is 16 million acres, 600,000 Navajos, and I think their police force is 500 people for 16 million acres, 110 communities. Yikes. So, sometimes if, because I lived out there for a while, and so sometimes if there's an emergency and you call the police, and, if you're in one of the remote communities, it might take the police 2 hours to get to you. You could be dead by then. But I mean, that's the realities, because of the size of the communities. So, when we were talking about having this listening session, people kind of raised their eyebrows and said, well, what does the Catholic Church have to do with human trafficking? Like, isn't the Catholic Church going to church every Sunday and First Communion, Confirmation, Baptism? What does that have to do with human trafficking? Well, as I mentioned way earlier in the presentation, we have the social teachings of the Catholic Church. And so that's why, the USCCB is very interested in human trafficking. So, as I mentioned, we had a listening session of 29 stakeholders at the St. Regis Mohawk tribe. We were very careful in terms of the venue that we picked because, in some communities, unfortunately, but because of residential schools, there are community members that are anti-Catholic. So the last thing we could do was have our listening session at, our Catholic hall or at the church. So the most neutral place was at the tribe. But even at the tribe, they were, they didn't understand or know the Catholic Church, the bishop, or the USCCB. So there was a whole education process there. And I think it was a wonderful thing that it happened because we opened a lot of people's minds. And so the objective of the session was to examine the root causes of human trafficking affecting Native American First Nation communities and to facilitate and identify trafficking cases within these populations, and then clarify the tactics and methods commonly used by traffickers to exploit vulnerable individuals. So, we had a targeted audience of, as I mentioned, Indigenous leadership, both local and external. St. Regis Mohawk Tribal Council, Mohawk Council of Akwesasronon, local Indigenous governments, advocacy networks, victims response service providers, social workers, Indigenous and non-Indigenous first responders. You would be amazed. Okay, and then also U.S. Law enforcement, border patrol agencies, and Canadian law enforcement, border patrol, and then the USCCB. You would be surprised. Like, we have schools here in the community. We have teachers that come from off reserve in Cornwall or Messina or Malone, or they know nothing about us. They just come in the community, they teach, they leave. So so it's always going to be an education process to have people understand us, because even in terms of the map that we showed you in the beginning, a lot of the service providers don't even understand kind of the complexity and the, jurisdictional realities of our community. So we had a listening session format. So we did a presentation kind of like what I'm doing now, in terms of, the role of the Catholic Church and the response to human trafficking issues. You'll see the bottom picture is Bishop Terry LaValle from Ogdensburg. And he was born, actually, I think, in Plattsburgh. So he really understands us. He's very supportive. And then the picture above is me, and he's on the right, and then I'm the next person to him. And then the lady with the white dress and the priest, they're from the USCCB in Washington, D.C., And then the last person on the left is our Filipino priest. That he's been with us for 15 years. So we broke out into like large group discussions, like plenary kind of things. And we talked about like what is human trafficking and, why are Native Americans more susceptible to human trafficking and who are the most vulnerable in Akwesasronon, in our community. And then, what are the issues and priorities pertaining to Indigenous human trafficking? And then what are the biggest challenges in Akwesasne based on what we've heard? And then what are the strategies and programs that are in place? So we do, one of the things that they've tried to do is to have an Indigenous liaison for the CBSA, Canadian Border Services Agency. They do have a Mohawk officer that it's his job to do liaison. Because daily there's always stuff that comes up at the border when people are crossing, and they always want to try to treat us different, and sometimes that doesn't work. So, and then there was another small group discussion. I don't know if you can move the slides up a little bit, Keith. The small group discussion is, like what are the cultural dimensions, the geographic and demographic implications of Akwesasne, and how do you address human trafficking, with our, very unique circumstances. Again, we're only 6 miles square. And, like you can see water, there's the river and then the borders and then the provinces, and then the state. And they're all in like where I live right now. You go a city block and you're in New York. Like I'm in Quebec right now, but you can stand in my driveway and look at the end of the road and it's New York. So if you're cops, chasing somebody, the first thing they do is run to the border and, I think we have multi-jurisdictional agreements now. But you can see in the pictures there where we had, there was, 2 clergy and chief sitting together talking. And then on the bottom, you see the lady I was talking about that healed. She was sitting with the priest and she called her the hoity-toity attorney general. And, but she meant it in a good way because she healed. It was amazing. Anyways, next slide. I'm almost done, you guys. So survivors are the kind of the strongest weapons that we have to combat human trafficking among Native Americans. Some victim assistance programs, they use peer-to-peer counseling models, which really works because if you have a victim and they're sitting there with a police officer or a social worker, and usually that person isn't Indigenous, it's very traumatic. And so by having peer-to-peer counseling, you have, maybe a Mohawk lady that's been through what the victim has been through. And, they understand, they talk the same language, they have the same culture. And so that's kind of one of the things that works the best for us is the peer-to-peer counseling. And then, hiring survivors to do sessions kind of like this to explain, in a variety of ways to victims and to caretakers, in terms of providing non-judgmental supports. And then, there's still distrust among Native Americans and Canada too, in terms of the authorities. Like, we have arguments all the time in our community with the Border Patrol, because, for example, where I live, for me, because I'm landlocked, I'm in Quebec, but to go anywhere else, I have to go through New York State and then, onto Ontario or whatever. And, so say a teacher is from Cornwall or off reserve and she's teaching here in St. Regis, if she leaves the community during the day she has to drive to the border, which is like, say, 8 miles away, and report and say, well, I left Quebec and I went through US just to um, for a coffee or something, and then so that reporting requirement is a big handicap for our community members because again, in my case, I can't go anywhere. I'm landlocked. I can't go anywhere without going through the border. And then they say, well, you have to report. Well, I went to the post office, which is like a mile from my house, but I have to report. And so a lot of our people, there's always going to be distrust about that issue of traveling within our own community, because that's the other thing is, leaving Quebec and going through New York State, it's still the reservation. So that's a challenge. And then so we need to have, relationships, and we need to have agreements in place so that all of the police and the border patrol and the US and the Canada, and they all work together. And then again, peer-led services also removes the cultural language barriers that most victims of human trafficking experience. So that's another big issue for us. Next slide. So in order to work with the different tribal communities, the most important activity is listening, especially to First Nation elders and wisdom keepers. So it was wonderful to have the USCCB come from Washington, and they have their ideas about, how do you handle human trafficking. But, they need to talk to us first. They need to visit the community. They need to listen to our people and our elders and see what our life is like. Then we talk about, solutions. So, a lot of tribal communities, don't like to be talked at. They want to be listened to first because, we were here a long, 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 long time. And, we know what things work for us and what things don't work. So part of this was to have more people talking about Indigenous human trafficking, or human trafficking in Indigenous communities, but also what does it mean to us, personally, and what are our stories, and what can we do to make sure that our community members aren't hurt or stolen or murdered. And that's okay. Next slide. So we understand that in Indigenous communities, it's often a gateway to other crimes. Again, like murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls. And so we need to have tools, and we need to work together, and we need to integrate culture and community with whatever we try to do. And then the most important step also is to have Indigenous people themselves, including elders, at the table when you're coming up with solutions. And that's what we did in our listening session last year, which I think was on like May 20th, so almost to the day. So the next slide is the gang. That was us. And like I said, there was police and border patrol, and the bishop. He's like kind of right in the middle, behind everybody by the quilt painting, and everybody walked away with something special, and it opened up new communications, new friendships, and our traditional people were the most. They weren't anxious to sit with these clergy, but then they found out after that, we're here to do this, to address this problem together, and it is an issue for the Catholic Church, not just for social programs, off the like off the reserve. It's everybody's problem. So the last slide is just myself. I'm the Indigenous Advisor to the Archdiocese of Ottawa-Cornwall, and so I can be reached by email. And then Felicitas is the anti-traffic education and outreach worker with the US CCB. And but unfortunately, this has been a 3-year project for us. And in the beginning of the third year, there were mega budget cuts in the US, and the whole anti-trafficking migrant program, there must have been like 600 staff. They're all gone. There's like 5 left now. So I don't know what the future is, but it's all about working together. Anyways, everybody, that's it. Thank you. Do you have any questions? Keith, I think you can open the floor.
Yeah, Rose-Alma, I'm really curious about this collaboration between the United States and among the cross-border collaboration. Is there any similar initiative with the CCCB for Indigenous communities and human trafficking, or are they collaborating with the USCCB on any of this?
So when we were approached by the USCCB, I did speak to our bishop from Valleyfield. He's a prominent member of the CCCB, and for whatever reason, it hasn't been as high profile an issue with the CCCB as it has been with the USCCB. And I don't know if that's because there's more numbers in the US than Canada. I don't believe that. I believe that the numbers are just as high in Canada as the US. I have, tried to bring it up, with the Archdiocese. And, unfortunately, because I keep mentioning, like with the USCCB, they had 600, staff, and they have like 5 left. So, they can only do so much, with the limited people. And I think that's the same way with the CCCB. I think there's like not enough staff, to address the issues. That's my take on it. Not that it's not important, right? It's important. But I just think that, the feedback that I got was, well, we don't have somebody assigned to that. Oh, okay. Yeah. So that's kind of the answer. Yeah.
Again, I see that programs are so important, like for the Indigenous. Does the United States CCB have, are they funding any programs, or is the government funding programs? And then again, my other question would be, is there anything that's being done in Canada to fund programs for the for the healing and the education and the prosecuting?
Yes. So, oh my goodness, there's lots of, where are you located, if you don't mind me asking? Are you in Ontario or where?
I'm in Ontario, yes.
Okay. So in Ontario, there's several programs. The Ontario Native Women's Association
Yes.
has an amazing program, and it's based around the red dress, May 5th.
Oh, yes,
Yeah,
yes.
people are aware of the May 5th red dress events. The Ontario Native Women's Association, they've done a lot of work on missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, and they have publications on their website. And so well, as a matter of fact, at one time there was an inquiry because of the high number of Indigenous women and girls that were being murdered and raped and victims. And so there was a national inquiry. The report was like about 4 inches thick. And so they created programs like across the country. And that's how I happened to work with Saskatchewan, because they had a provincial program, for the victims and the families of murdered and missing Indigenous and women and girls. But it wasn't a permanent funding, so it sunsetted, and it was doing wonderful stuff, and so I think it might have got extended. I don't know if it still exists, but they had those programs all across Canada, and they were, as I mentioned in my presentation, they were operated by Indigenous people. Like, they had,
Yes.
yeah. So I know that because of the Indian residential schools funding as well, and then the murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls. And then there was the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples, several years back. And they identified all of these issues, and there was money, but it was all pilot projects, it wasn't permanent funding. So but I know that there has been a big investment in Canada related to that. In the US, unfortunately, with the current administration, they cut all over the place. And, like for us, the biggest cut was, the USCCB migrant worker program, because it provided like uh, circle services, like housing and education and language and, food and employment. And then boom, there's five staff left. So um, so it's a priority. I think, from what we learned in our listening session, nobody can deny that human trafficking is not a priority, right? We all agree on that. But in terms of how do we all work together, it's complicated, because of, there's other community, like any reserve has their own jurisdiction, right? They have their own governance. So how do they relate with, the mainstream police? And yeah, so those are, arrangements, agreements that they have to work out. But we're plugging along, you know. We have a lady here. Her name is Jojo, and she's got tattoos, and she's her hair shaved off, and she looks tough. You know what I mean? Like, don't mess with me. And she has rescued several of our young women that, and that's what you have to do, right? You just have to, meet them head
Yeah.
on. Yeah. So thank you for your question.
Thank you, Dolly. Thank you.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say one more thing about this issue from kind of a global perspective. So a number of years ago, I was attending the Parliament of the World Religions. I don't know if you've heard of that group, but anyway, it's an organization that's been around for about 100 years, and they hold a big international conference about every 4 years. And it really is an initiative to try to bring all the religious traditions on the planet, and it's recognized by the United Nations. It has status at the UN. And part of their mandate, the reason they came together, was really to try to for all the religions of the world to kind of work together to build the kind of world that we all believe human beings deserve. And I went to a workshop, all that to say, there was a workshop there on human trafficking, and I was blown away at first of all, just the scope of the problem. And you mentioned, Dolly, like 49.6 million people worldwide are involved in it somehow, are being trafficked. And there are a variety of ways that happens, often cultural, often related to poverty, often related to vulnerabilities that different populations have. So the ones that are most vulnerable are the ones that get exploited. But I was amazed at, like, when you run a business, you have to make money, and money has to flow, and people are getting paid, and money's flowing through bank accounts, and it's flying using credit cards. Like, I was astounded to learn the sophisticated financial structures that are in place that underpin the human trafficking. So I absolutely agree, and I think Celeste's point about programs, and in your point that it has to be done community by community, this is true. And we need to, that's where we can locally maybe be working with our local churches, our local diocese, our local, if we want to be in solidarity with local First Nations around, because I know a lot of religious orders, a lot of women's religious orders, the SSND, Celeste, your community has a big human trafficking program, no, based in Washington. Don't you have somebody in Washington who's working on human trafficking for the order? So I think there are places where it's happening, and we should learn who's doing it and how we can support them. But the other thing is that there are these, and we're hearing about all this cyber Bitcoin and cyber money and stuff like that. So the ability for people to actually profit from this, and the ability, so there is a big global, there's a kind of a global board or group of people from all the different parts of the like financial systems and things that are trying to identify where this money is moving through the internet and how to trace it to people who are doing this. So there is that community-based piece. At the end of the day, strong communities and people with options will be more resilient to these exploitations. But at the same time, it seems to me there's this superstructure, like the opposite of infrastructure. There's a superstructure of financial transactions that are making this possible. And they're using technology, they're using the internet, in some cases they're using the dark web. And so at a kind of a policy level, nationally and internationally, we need to really support, I think, doing more to stop the cybercrime dimension of this, because there is a big kind of technology dimension to this. So I just wanted to, point out that this is a business and people are making billions of dollars. How many billions of dollars? But Dolly, did you say this business was in your first slide? It was like 29 billion or something.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a lot. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah.
The other challenge that we're running into as well, 236 billion, Kathy. Yeah, 236 billion. So, the other thing that we're trying to do is to educate our young people about the internet, like you say, because these young people, they go on there and they start flirting with somebody, and then somebody says, "Oh, meet me here at the casino." That's a easy place, right? Oh, let's go to the casino, and then they get victimized. Um, so it's a big challenge. And that's why it's so important to get this word out, in terms of, like, it's not a simple issue. It's like you say, the money, the big business, and we're just little guys here. Imagine, like, kind of the mainstream non-indigenous trying to deal with the issue, and then us not having the same kind of resources. It's all about resources too, right? Like, if we don't have the resources, then it's going to be difficult to design and put in mechanisms in place.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah, there we go.
Okay. I live in BC. I'm non-Indigenous, and we want to work with community by community. Now, how would I get a hold of an Indigenous elder to work with us? Because, as you said, they don't want to be talked at. They want us to listen to them. So to set up programs and help the Indigenous communities, how would I contact the different elders from the tribes?
So where are you in BC, if you don't mind me asking?
I'm in a place called Armstrong. It's kind of by Kamloops, but I know Prince George has got a lot of Indigenous, and that's kind of where I'm focusing on right now, because I used to live up there and I know the Highway of Tears, drove it many
Yes.
times. Yeah. So I know a lot of the Indigenous people as a young person, but how do I get a hold of the elders to set up programs?
So in BC, they do have like a BC Regional Chiefs organization, and I'm guessing they're based in Vancouver. I'm guessing.
Okay.
But if you just Google BC Chiefs of British Columbia,
Mhm.
should be able to get a menu of organizations that would be like for the region, and then there would be some, sub groups that would
Yeah.
be regional. Um, that would be the best way is to go through the BC Chiefs. And
Perfect.
yeah, and then they because they might even have a program. I think I might have seen something that because it, like you say, the Highway of Tears, like that's a big deal in British Columbia. And so there are programs in place, there's awareness. And so they would be able to let you know like what programs they're doing, but also who their elders are. Because I did some work out in Squamish, and
Mhm.
and the lady that picked me up at the airport was a little tiny elder, but she was like just like she took on the drug dealers in her community, and they were like soliciting kids and people and stuff and selling drugs, and she would walk right up to their car and say,
Oh, not
"Get
scared.
out of here, we don't want you here."
Good for her. Good for her.
She
Yeah.
But you know what? That sometimes that's what it takes. Like to put your life in
Mhm.
at risk, but she cared, right? And that's what she did. And then, I mentioned a conference that we had that was here last year, and there were some people that did that, that just said, I'm not gonna be your slave or whatever,
Mhm.
get out of here. Like,
Yep.
we
Well, that
don't
would be great because then I wouldn't be reinventing the wheel. I could go to them as a resource and see what they're already doing. So,
exactly.
yeah, that sounds
Exactly.
great. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
We don't have any further questions. I believe I'm going to be turning this over to Father Daryl.
Oh, he's here now?
Yeah.
Yay. Okay.
So
Hi, Father Carol.
I'm here. Hi, Dolly.
How are you?
Um, so I couldn't join in right away. I live in a remote place now. I don't live in Ottawa. I live in near Manitoulin Island, and the internet can be very shaky here. So I joined you. I missed the first part of your conversation, but I was there for the second half. And I just want to say, as you mentioned, Dolly, this is a important something for us to be more aware. It happens all around us. Human trafficking is happening all around us, and we're not aware of it because it's not like someone driving up in a van and kidnapping a woman and throwing her and then taking off. It doesn't appear, it's much more subtle than that. And as you mentioned already, the internet plays an important role in human luring young people. So here on Manitoulin, where I'm at, there is a big sign that starts from Sudbury and goes to the Sioux, but signs everywhere for a young woman named Juanita Miguance. She's from my community, Chaging First. She's been missing. It's assumed that she has been lured by human traffickers. So we see it in remote communities on Manitoulin Island even. And human trafficking is all around us. And sometimes people who are being trafficked wouldn't describe it that way. They don't recognize it, but they're being exploited. And as Kathy mentioned, the profits are huge. The reason there is human trafficking is because people are making money from it. And so they make money and they lure people into prostitution, to escorting, all different kinds of things to make money, profit. The whole point is money. And then who they allure here in Manitoulin are young women, sometimes girls, who are feeling isolated, psychologically vulnerable, some who already suffer from addictions, people who are still suffering from intergenerational trauma, all of these things that Native people have in general. Sometimes it's heightened in our youth and in our adolescence. And so it makes them vulnerable to people on the internet grooming. And the internet's full of groomers. Snapchat, Facebook, all of these applications that young people go on, it becomes a beautiful hunting ground to lure people for money, profit. The people who are doing the trafficking can be boyfriends. They can be family members who are exploiting some of their own sisters or cousins. It can be members of gangs. What we find on Manitoulin, I'm not giving a second presentation here, but on Manitoulin, we find people coming here from Toronto and infiltrating, entering our Native communities. We have 6 Indigenous communities on Manitoulin, and they'll take over a household because, first of all, they seek people who are addicted to drugs, and then they take over the house, and they've developed like headquarters and systems of trafficking of all sorts. So that's what happens. So anyway, I'm learning about it too because of this missing woman named Juanita Miigwech. Miigwech's in Ojibwe means feather. And so she belongs to this community, the Miigwech's family, and they're in terrible grief about her loss. And probably it was through some form of human trafficking. She was probably lured by different things. It doesn't have to be drugs. They can be lured because they're feeling lonely or they're looking for some sort of, I don't know, what can I say, affirmation or self-esteem. And because, a lot of youth, Dolly, the same thing in Akwesasronon, a lot of our youth are very vulnerable to inherited experiences of trauma, addictions, all of these things. So that's what we see here on Manitoulin. That's another thing you point out, Dolly, is that it's local. There's a local variation of how human trafficking, and Kathy pointed out too, it's as a global affair thing, it's very adapted to local circumstances, the vulnerabilities that exist in different places. Anyway, I want to thank you, Dolly, for this afternoon and for your helping us to become more aware of issues that are affecting, as you mentioned, our church needs to be aware of these kinds of things too, if only to minister to people who need growth in self-awareness, a growth in self-esteem, encouragement in their lives. All of those things are important. So I want to thank you for being here today and giving us this presentation. I'm learning about it too, and from my local community setting. Yeah, thank you, Miigwech. Niawan.
So one thing I do want to agree with you, Father. So some of the programs that we have in the community are teaching the kids about their culture. Like the vulnerable ones, like you say, they're learning the language, they're learning to sing, like the traditional songs and to dance. And we've had 3 powwows in the last 2 weeks. We had one, children's powwow organized by the community, and then we have another one this week that's operated by the school board. So if the kids learn, especially young girls, if they learn their culture and their language and they are so proud of their traditional dresses and human trafficking, or not human trafficking, the hoop dancers. We have hoop dancers, and they're so proud. And then like somebody's not going to be able to victimize them quite as easily. I mean, these traffickers are smooth, trust me. And some of these young people, oh, I don't like it here. It's too isolated. It's boring. And somebody comes, oh, I'll take you to New York City, and we'll have fun. Well, away they go. Like
That's part of the grooming
that's
process.
Part of the grooming, yeah.
But it is true. One way to end so much of human trafficking is by encouraging the healing of our communities. there, and it's not true that we're all broken
No.
and unhealable. There is healing going on. Not long ago, I was at Six Nations. We saw examples of young people loving their culture and wanting to show others their culture. So there is a growth that's called reconciliation, when we're being encouraged to develop our culture, our traditions, and all this. It makes human trafficking more difficult if you can't lure so easily people who are healthy and balanced and content with who they are. So it's the vulnerable people that are victims of trafficking. Yeah.
Well, they're still there, Father. Like in the education system, we still have poor people that,
Yeah.
that they don't have food. Like, we provide uh, bags of food on the weekend to the kids, discreetly, right? Well, and they take it home because their family doesn't have food. Like, we still have those kinds of people in this community,
Yeah.
and so, and it starts right in the schools to try to help them and feed them and, give them hope. And yeah, it's a big job, you know. And I'm glad that you mentioned, like, with the Catholic Church, when we had our listening session, people were kind of surprised. Why is the church here? Why is the bishop here? Well, because it's part of our social teachings. Like, the church cares about God's children, right? And, and we need to, the priests, they need to know this issue, right? Because we've had incidences where, a family has, come to the pastor to, for help. So it's an education process on a whole bunch of levels. It's so nice to see you, Father.
Nice to see you too, Dolly.
We miss
Haven't
you
seen you in a
here.
little while.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, both of you, Rose-Alma and Father Darrell. I'm glad you made it. And Kathy, for your questions, and all of the others who participated. I do want to comment on the one thing was about the cop. I think she was Indigenous who became a cop, and she was calling the Attorney General something, Mrs. Uppity up. But what I got out of that was the gift of synodality, because you even mentioned with the priests that some people came they were Catholic Church haters or priest haters too. And even some of the priests were not too sure what they thought about all the Indigenous, but the listening, the synodality, telling each other the stories and where they were coming from and what they had experienced, that really helped them be able to be friendly and take shots at each other in a friendly way. And that to me was impressive. So anyway, to wrap up for Kathy and everyone, thank you for being here today. We have come to the end of our time together for today, and we hope that you are as moved and inspired by Rose-Alma's excellent presentation. The recording of today's presentation will be made available on our website in a few weeks. If you are a subscriber to CLC, you will receive the recording link in a future newsletter. Please sign up if you have not already done so to stay informed about future programs and events. Thank you to everyone who supports us through their presence, their prayers, and their talents. You are the reason we do this. If it is within your means to make a financial contribution to help us bring you more great programs, you may do so at our website. We are a registered charity, and you will receive a charitable donation for income tax purposes. Most of all, we ask for your prayers. This work is a long-term commitment, and we need God's grace to persist. Please plan to join us on Thursday, June the 4th in the evening, when we will mark the first anniversary of Journey of Encounter. Pilgrims of Hope, Embracing Synodality, a synodal gathering held in June 2025 at St. Jerome's University in Waterloo, Ontario, with a roundtable conversation in partnership with the Oblate Centers on the topic Towards the Spirituality of Synodality. We are honored to have as presenters Bishop Alan Faubert, Bishop of Valleyfield, Ordinary Council of the Synod Secretariat, Sandy Prather, facilitator of retreats, conferences, and workshops, Father Ron Rollheiser, OMI, theologian and author, and Monique Wajnuk, facilitator dossier for synodality, the Archdiocese of Gatineau. And the roundtable will be moderated by CLC's own Mark Guevara and Tara Herford of the Center Oblate. Please keep watching our website for other activities to mark the anniversary and advance synodality in Canada. As you leave here today, we hope you are enriched in your understanding of what it means to be church, confirmed in your faith in the liberating Spirit of Jesus, and inspired to do whatever is given to you to do to build up the body of Christ in our place and time. Our prayer continues to be for lay Catholics everywhere to come together, to learn together, to pray together, to act together for healing, reconciliation, and transformation. Thank you again to Dr. McDonald for being with us, and thank you to everyone else for coming. And God bless and enjoy the rest of your own week. Bye now.